successful doctors came out of that medical school, totally contrary to the anticipation of apartheid. If you take from the minister down now to Makgoba, to all these people, a remarkable group of people came out here. But the other thing is that nobody has ever said something about. What I find totally remarkable is that my wife and her sister left here in 82 or 83 and never put their feet here again till today. For 30 years they didn't come near this place. So they just came here, got an education and left. And that's another part of the black students who were at this university during that time. On the one hand, they were seen as protesting in the later 80s, and as Rose said, but within 2 weeks in medical school, there was a boycott. And the political education ran along with the medical education. And that's gone today. I mean, I wonder what's happening to this medical school today. I mean, in terms of the social, ideological component of medicine. So I think there's some very interesting stories about this, what the institution was, and when people say there's no transformation, what do we actually mean by that? Any case, it's time for the next panel, is it? And who's the chair? Cheryl? There's the chair. No, it's not lunchtime yet. That's an old Natal tradition. 12 o'clock.
Good day, colleagues. If I could just ask the panelists to join us, please.
Oh, yes, he was on this. Come. But we will have a general discussion at the end of the session. So you just take the session.
You just ask them to talk.
I see we are really making Prof. Makgoba work today. Good day, colleagues. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Urmila Bob, the University Dean of Research, and I have the particular pleasure of facilitating and this panel, who in their own right are movers and shakers and certainly play to their own drum, and have caused a range of controversies and bucking the system and questioning things as they went along as well. And I'd like to quickly just introduce you to the panel. Prof. Renuka Vithal is our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Teaching and Learning. Prof. Fikile Mazubuko was one of our Deputy Vice Chancellors in Humanities, was the Vice Chancellor in the University of Zululand more recently, and as Prof. Potgieter said earlier, we now have the pleasure of having her back as Emeritus Professor. Prof. Kesh Govinder is the Dean and Head of School in Mathematics and Statistics and Computer Sciences. I should get all in there. But perhaps even better known as Prof. Makgoba's partner in crime of daring to come up with the Equity Index. Before I start with the panel, yes, that's him. That's him. So if you came here to sort the Equity Index out, they're both on either side of the two beautiful ladies. Before I start, Prof, I just would like to share with you that although we didn't have the privilege at UTW of having you enter with a special garb, I can assure you, you still shook us to our foundations. You clearly change was coming, and it was going to be rough whether you were ready or not. And I would like to just share with you that Prof. Makgoba's, perhaps one of his first visits to the then University of Durban Westville was in a place called T Block, which is the largest venue for teaching students. And I think it takes about 800 students, the big one. And Prof. Makgoba walked in, gave his speech, and did all of that, and then answered our questions. And perhaps, Prof, for my sake, you can today reveal how you knew things about us. Because Prof. Makgoba would answer the question and then say something like, Urmila, that's a good question, but you don't have a PhD. You're an academic. Could you please focus on getting a PhD? How he knew all this about all of us still fascinates me. So perhaps I can start. Prof? Prof. Masabuku? Kesh, are you first? Go ahead. There is an order. That's how badly trained I am.
That's all right. Sorry. Okay. Good afternoon. Just give me a second as I sit up. My apologies. I should have been a bit more organized. While this is getting sorted out, I was interested when Prof actually said, when he first met Prof. Makgoba, how well they got on and the relationship that they had. I cannot claim that sort of history. When I first met Prof. Makgoba, I cannot say that we got on. I have to be absolutely honest about that. We had a particular way of interacting, and I think a number of you will be amused by some of the emails that we exchanged. But I think even sitting in polar opposites, we both knew that we were passionate about the institution. And we both knew that each other were trying to do something for this institution. And I think it says a lot about this person, Makgoba, that even though we were so poles apart, together today, we're working very closely on a project, a very, very important project. And I think that perhaps is a lesson for all of us in terms of the way we interact with the people that we have around us. Some of our most fierce and ardent opponents could indeed be the people that we work very closely with and can get a lot of good out. And I think when we think about transformation, it does talk about how we transform our thinking of ourselves and other people. And for me, that was quite a lesson I took away from my interactions with Professor Makgoba. Now, earlier when he was speaking, and I was fortunate to just come into the end of that discussion, he pointed out that one needs to be true to who one is. And given his medical training, that is indeed what has guided him in a number of things that he did in his life. And I have to say that I've taken my life has been rather similar. I'm a mathematician. If you ask me to define myself in any way, the very first thing I'll tell any one of you is I am a mathematician, which means I work not just with numbers, but I work with all sorts of mathematics, but I need something that is quantifiable. For me, whatever we do, we need to be looking at something that is quantifiable. And something that Prof. Makgoba brought to transformation at both Natal and to UKZN, was to quantify or measure what we're doing. Because we all talk about transformation, and I will be very frank about the fact that I accept that every single institution, every single company in South Africa is undertaking transformation of some sort. The question is, are you being effective? Are you making any difference? Okay? And given that background, my background, and what Prof. Makgoba was trying to do, I think it was natural that ultimately we would come up with what has become a fairly controversial idea of the equity index. Now, if I can get this PC to do its job, and my apologies, I'm not a PC person, which is why I'm struggling a little bit, but bottom right. On the red line, there we go, right, okay. Thank you, my apologies. Here's another analogy. We're both Mac people, so these PCs give us all sorts of problems. So what I want to talk to you very briefly about today is the work that we've been doing, and really to make a case for the need for a quantitative evaluation of transformation. And so why do we need this? Okay, when we're doing various things with regards to transformation, why would we need to really quantify the effect of transformation? And why do we need some sort of formula to do this? If we were just looking at gender, for example, okay, it's very easy to see whether we're transforming or not. Okay, you have just two percentages, they're going to add up to 100%, and you can see whether you're getting closer to the national demographics or not. It's very, very simple to do. But when you start bringing race into it, certainly in the South African context, where you're now dealing with 4 race groups, it's no longer that easy. And here's just a simple example. Let's assume that in 2004, your racial demographics was as follows. You had 70% African, 2% colored, 4% Indian, and 24% white. Okay? And you moved to 2009 and realized that with regards to African demographics, you moved up to 72%. With regards to colored demographics, you moved down to 1%. With regards to Indians, you moved down to 2%. And with regards to whites, you moved up to 25%. So you moved up in some, down in others. Where are you going? Okay, are you really getting to mirror the national demographics? And just looking at these two sets of figures, you will not be able to say that. Okay? So what we decided to do was to take the idea of distance, very simple idea of distance, and use that in this context of racial and gender demographics. So this is the way to look at it. Okay? Let us assume that we all want to go to Polokwane, right? That's where we're trying to get. In other words, the national demographics, that's what we're trying to get. If you're starting in Cape Town, you've got quite a long way to go. If you're starting off in Kimberley, it's not too far. If you're starting from Johannesburg, it's going to be a different route. But the point is, you can always say that Cape Town is quite far from Polokwane, Kimberley is a lot closer, and Johannesburg is the closest of the three. Right? So if you have this idea of distance, you know how far you are from a particular point that you're trying to get to. Okay? So using this idea of distance, and I'm sorry, as I said earlier, I'm a mathematician. I refuse to give any talk that doesn't have at least one equation. So I will throw that equation at you. It's your theorem of Pythagoras. If for those of you who've forgotten your high school mathematics, this is all that this is. Okay? But this is this nice little formula that we came up with that really gave you a sense of how far your organizational demographics are from the national demographics. Okay? And the nice thing about this is it gave you one number. So if the number was 10 versus 20, you know whether you're closer to the national demographics or not. Okay? That was the beauty of this very simple approach. The smaller the number, the smaller the distance, it meant that you were much closer to the national demographics. As the numbers increased, it meant that you were further and further away. So how would you interpret this number? And let us assume we're all trying to get to this red dot right in the middle here, which is near Kimberley. If you started in Polokwane or if you started in Cape Town, you would have the same distance to travel. Okay? But you will still have to travel, you'll have the same distance to travel, but you'll be traveling in different directions. Okay? And I think this is a very nice analogy to the fact that we all have different paths to travel when it comes to transformation. Okay? We're all trying to get to the same place, but we'll have different paths. Okay? Another nice thing about using this approach of distance is that when it comes to the fact that everybody is actually undertaking transformation in some form, okay, your direction is absolutely crucial. If you're starting in Cape Town, and there's actually a total coincidence that I'm choosing that city, okay, and if you walk, say, in that direction, okay, you may put in a lot of effort. You may walk all the way in this direction, come all the way around here, and eventually end up in Kimberley. Okay? You put in a lot of work. You eventually got to this particular place, but you started off perhaps going in the wrong direction. Okay? So the idea is that you may all be doing a lot of work, but you may not be going to where you want to be going. Okay? You may be going in the different directions, or you may be running in the same spot. And this is why it's important to quantitatively evaluate where you're going with your transformation. Okay. Now I'm throwing up some figures at you. Don't worry too much about the figures. The important thing is to understand what these mean. If we take, for example, the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, it has an enrollment equity index of just over 28. It has a graduation equity index of just over 33. Right? So don't worry about those actual figures, but the relative number is important. Your enrollment has a smaller equity index than your graduation. So what does that mean? It means that the profile of students that you're graduating is actually further away from the national demographics than the profile of students that you're enrolling. And so you can see immediately, once you have this sort of measure, you can start looking at these things and saying, hang on, what are we doing at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology? How are we losing profiles of certain students along the way? So hopefully that tells you something about why one would need to use something like the equity index to understand what we're doing in terms of transformation and what the effect is. If we want to go to the staff, you can also quantify the equity indices of the staff. Okay? If we go back to the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, the overall staff equity index is 45. So what does that tell you? Well, if your graduation equity index is 33 and your staff profile is 45, effectively you're not employing the type of people that you're graduating. Right? So you can start really asking these deep questions about what really are we doing at universities. Okay? I won't go through all the details of on these slides, but I do want to just pay a little bit of attention to something that we've talked about a lot today, and that is looking at productivity and research profiles of academic staff at different universities. What this equity index allows you to do is start weighting your research output in terms of equity. Okay, and as a result of that, you can start looking at which universities have a better profile in terms of the research output together with their equity profile. Essentially looking at who is doing the work at these universities and who should be doing the work at these universities. A slightly more illustrative way of looking at this is to actually plot your equity index on this axis and your output on this axis. Okay? We've got these 4 quadrants here, so you can look at this quadrant in the upper left, where you have universities who have a poor equity index because it's very high, and also poor output because that's quite low. Okay? Here you have universities that have a better equity index because it's low, but they also have poor output. Okay? Down up here, you have universities who have a poor equity index, but they have high output. Everybody wants to be down here, okay, where you have a low equity index and a high output. Okay? It really was quite a coincidence that UKZN was the only institution there. But I should also point out, and I always make this point when I show this transparency, that is not a good position, because a slight perturbation will push us up there. Okay? So effectively, this is where universities want to be, but we're not there. Okay? You can nuance this if you look at per capita output as well, but I'm not really going to go into all that sort of detail. What I really want to hope that you can take away from this is that whether you like the equity index or not, okay, it's an important tool to use to evaluate transformation. You may come up with other, perhaps better tools that one could use, but it is undeniable that we need such a tool. I've had some interesting conversations with some visiting statisticians about how difficult this problem is. But we're academics. Because the problem is difficult doesn't mean we should continue to ignore it. And I'm confident that even in his retirement, Professor Makgoba will still be working on this and will not be ignoring this very, very important problem. And I look forward to working with you as we finalize this very important problem. Okay, thank you very much.
Do you want to remove it?
No, that's fine. Let's just
Just
close
close it. Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you, Program Director. I'm just going to share my experience as part of the executive team that worked with Professor Makgoba, the interim executive and the post-2004 executive. I'll highlight a few points. Most of the detail of the experience of those executives are in this book, The Creation of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Reflections on a Merger and Transformation Experience. I just want to start by mentioning 2 challenges because they've been referred to, and Prof. Makgoba was very particular on these 2. The story of a doctorate. One of the things that intrigued me in our college, the College of Humanities, was to listen to colleagues articulating very eloquently why they don't have to have doctorates in their disciplines. It was a very interesting but disturbing discussion. But I must say that part of the interventions were to ensure that people acquire their doctorates, not because it's a title or it's prestigious, but it was important for the integrity of the institution and to build postgraduate programs, and just to ensure that we give students a worth of their money. The second one was the difficulty and the resistance to jettison or to retire programs or modules that we no longer needed. It was a very, very difficult experience, and I would suspect that that's still a bit of a challenge. Why the merger? I'm not going to go into that. I just want to mention that that is detailed in chapter 1 of this book, pages 1 to 23. But what I want to highlight is that people take cues from their leaders as an executive team, I think we also took cues from the Vice Chancellor. There was an overall willingness in the teams to take risks and not to shun difficult and complex matters. Imagine if we had a Vice Chancellor who shunned difficult situations. So we had to actually practice this in the colleges because it was not easy. Even in the executive meetings, there were a few tears shed at some executive meetings, but that did not necessarily mean that we were enemies. It was the difficult nature of some of the issues that we had to deal with. And we learned and we made this part of our practice to try and look for solutions before we go to the executive meeting, to Senate and other structures, come up with solutions which then forced us to engage with colleagues in colleges and give space to people to make a contribution. And I would say Council and the Vice Chancellor here, because Council gave the Vice Chancellor the space to put together his team. And I think I would say Council took a jump into the dark because the executive team in 2005 to 2009 were looking at people who were relatively new in leadership, who were plunging into the unknown, but in essence, I would say it was new blood. There were people who understood the journey that we were about to take, and there were scholars, there were researchers, there were academics in their own right, and there were independent thinkers, very difficult personalities, but always had substance. And at the end of it all, Professor Makgoba was able to pull the team together. We were not enemies, but we could differ vehemently at meetings, not necessarily because we were enemies, but it was all to the interest of the institution. And in the chapter that talks about the model, the college model, you can actually pick up the debates that took place at our meetings, Senate and the executive meetings. Courageous and visionary leadership, this has been alluded to. I think we also highlight that in chapter 3, which are pages 50 to 72. I think we had a very courageous Vice Chancellor throughout the major period that is extending from 2001 to 2009. I'm saying courageous because there were instances when we had to change leadership and we had to step down from our positions. And it started with the Vice Chancellor himself. In fact, it was quite shocking, but he stepped down when we became the new institution in 2004. He stepped down. There was a whole process, advertising and interview, a huge team that interviewed the Vice Chancellor, and we took it from there. It was not taken for granted that because he's been there or the executive team has been there, we then continue. There was a robust process. And as deans, when the two institutions merged, there were 22 deans between the two institutions. And we all had to understand that we will need 8 deans because there were going to be 8 faculties. We did not spend much time resisting that or trying to justify who will be the dean. There was a clear guideline who the deans will be, and people who felt they fitted into the requirements applied for those positions. And those who were not deans did not form a cabal of resistance. They went back as academics and continued to be scholars and academics and supervisors. But it took a very robust discussion to agree that we can't carry on with 22 deans. We are merging. We are going to have 8 faculties, each faculty, 8 faculties and 4 colleges. So I think that also needed a leader who is decisive, who can give space for people to consult and reflect, but at a certain point, take a decision. Also, the merger, I think, was a story of success because all sectors were involved and participated in the process. student formations, unions. We did not have one union, we had at least 5 unions in the 2 institutions, academics and the councils. And linking that with governance, I think we had an advantage because we had councils which understood their roles. That is the councils of the both previous institutions and the councils of the new institution. Part of the problem with some of the institutions which are having serious problems in this country, or probably which might need to be closed down, is the problem of councils. Councils who don't understand their role as councils, councils who put the academic enterprise on the side, remove it from the center, put it into the side, and see the institution as